Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of Our Lives, where we're joined by Kate Holden, who is a trichologist. If, like me, you have spent the last couple of decades abusing your hair with box dyes and bleaches and various crazy colours, this could just be the episode for you. We're going to talk today about the inevitable changes that you experience as you age around your hair. But I think probably, Kate, first of all, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Kate, what is a trichologist?
Great question. So, a trichologist is a non medical hair and scalp specialist. So, if you think of the difference between like a nutritionist, perhaps, or and a dietitian, that's kind of the difference between a trichologist and a dermatologist. Obviously, a dermatologist is a medical doctor. A trichologist is somebody who has been clinically trained to diagnose and treat lots of hair and scalp conditions. And we all work in private practice primarily. In terms of what we can help with all types of hair loss and scalp problems. And the reason for that is many hair loss and scalp problems can be treated either without medicine, without medical intervention, or they're more of a holistic lifestyle, perhaps, dietary or stress related issue, or even a hair care issue.
Okay, I think that probably brings us on. So, what we did for this episode is we polled a group of ladies and came up with their top questions that they wanted to put to you. And I think the first one is a lot of the ladies my age, in a sort of early to mid 40s, I'm going to go with the early 40s, have noticed that their hair has changed from when they were younger. I certainly have noticed that my hair has always been very thick, but it's not so much anymore. It's thinned out. It doesn't have the same texture. Is that normal around this age, or is that something we should all expect? And is there something that we can do to prevent that?
Yeah, so it is very normal. So often, actually, our hair can get a little bit thicker as we age up until about, the age of 40, sort of midlife time. Then, in terms of whether it's normal or not, it depends on the extent of the changes that you've noticed. So some women will experience significant changes to their hair and scalp. So if it's getting to the point where you're really concerned and you're seeing noticeable hair loss and changes in texture, your curl pattern's completely changed, or you're experiencing a lot of breakage, or your hair's not growing to the same length as it used to, that's a sign that there might be something that a trichologist or a dermatologist needs to look at. But if you're noticing just generally your hair feeling a little bit drier, it's not quite getting the same volume as it used to, that's very normal.
Okay, so thinking about the health conditions that could potentially affect the quality or the texture of your hair, what are some of those health conditions? I know a lot of us coming up to perimenopause or menopause itself. Is that something that can affect the hair in any great way?
Yeah, so there's lots of different things that can affect your hair, and there's different hair loss conditions. So the most common one that you might come across is something called female pattern hair loss, which is the sort of female equivalent of male pattern hair loss. It looks different,
Okay.
but many women will start to notice these changes around kind of perimenopause, menopause age. They do start earlier, so we can detect clinically female pattern hair loss in around 20% of women in their 20s. So it's again very normal. And then post-menopause, it's around 40% of women who'll have female pattern hair loss. And that is primarily genetic, but it is also driven by hormones. So essentially, as I'm sure you know, during menopause, your estrogen plummets and your androgens stay about the same level. And it's that change in the hormonal balance that can impact your hair. In terms of other health conditions, so there's lots of medications that can affect your hair. HRT is one of them. There's also general stress, lifestyle, what you're eating, thyroid problems. There's some autoimmune conditions. So there's many different things that can impact it.
Lots and lots of different areas. I think, could you describe to me, it's interesting you say that women have the patterned hair loss,
Hmm.
baldness. what does that look like in women as opposed to, because we all know the general pattern with men, with sort of the receding hairline or the sort of the Friar Tuck look, if you like. What does it look like in women?
So it's classically described as a widening of the parting. So in
Okay.
women, you'll experience a widening of the parting. So if you kind of look down, and many of the women that I'll see in clinic will say, I saw it, I went into the bathroom at work, and with the bright overhead lights, I could just see my scalp. And that is classically how women will start to notice their hair thinning. Some women do have more of what's considered a kind of male appearance. So they might have thinning at the crown or at the back of the scalp.
Okay.
That can happen too. But yeah, normally it's just seeing that sort of hair loss on the top of the scalp.
It's amazing how many things you do start noticing when you hit your 40s and you look in the mirror, and hair unfortunately starts growing out of different places, normally on your chin as opposed to the top of your head. Are you seeing more women who are recognizing this as a challenge? And are you seeing more people visiting your clinics to talk about this now? Is there still a taboo around hair loss or the changes in your hair as we age?
Yeah, so trichology has been around for 100 years and more. So it's a very English profession. So if you're listening kind of outside of the UK, there are trichologists overseas, but we're really quite like a British profession. We're
Okay, that's
becoming more
interesting.
known about. So there are, we are seeing more women and men come into clinic. There is still a massive taboo around hair loss in both men and women. And particularly, with all sorts of conditions that can affect women, there is a problem in primary care in dismissing it as a concern, and seeing it as a cosmetic issue rather than a medical issue, which it can certainly be. And because of that, that's where trichologists can step in. And I spend a lot of my time communicating to GPs on behalf of my patients to try and advocate for them to get them seen. So yes, it's still taboo, but it is becoming a little bit more talked about.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think as well, what we certainly over the last sort of decade or so is we're seeing people on social media, people's appearance, people are chronically online. We're all on Zoom meetings, and I think seeing your reflection almost constantly throughout the day is something that's making people perhaps feel far more aware of their appearance. And I've noticed, and I don't know whether it's just something I've picked up, it's my algorithms, is a lot of people going abroad for hair transplants, whether they have the sort of the forehead shortened or just having those. It seems that to me like quite an extreme thing to do is to have a hair transplant. And I know a lot of people will be looking at that option. What should people look out for? Is it a good idea? Is it depend on the person, or and how successful are they, and what inherent risks come with having hair transplants?
Yeah, so hair transplants have gotten much better over the past sort of 20 years. So, if you're kind of comparing what a hair transplant was like, before 2000 to now, they are massively different. And they are generally very successful and very safe. In terms of what, if you are suitable, if you're a suitable candidate or not for a transplant, it depends on the type of hair loss you have, the stage of hair loss, and whether or not it's going to give the cosmetic impact that you want it to have, essentially. So in men, if you're looking for a transplant, your hair loss has to be progressed enough. So usually you have to be at least over the age of 25, because if you have a hair transplant too early, then you'll have to have multiple transplants, which is not
Right.
ideal.
Okay.
In women, it's not super common to get a transplant for female pattern hair loss because most women will not lose all of their hair. And there are easy over-the-counter treatments that are accessible that do work. If, and the other disadvantages of hair transplants for women is you do have to shave the scalp often. There are some techniques now where you don't have to, but most of the time you do have to shave your scalp. The other consideration is there are some scarring conditions where a transplant might be suitable. I have seen women with traction alopecia, so that's the hair loss at the front that's caused by persistent tension on the hair. Transplants can be successful in those. But yeah, it really depends. But they are really the only permanent solution to a hair loss condition like male or female pattern hair loss, because the other treatments are what's called treadmill treatments. So you have to keep using them for as long as you want to see the effect.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. I think we'll potentially start seeing more and more of this. But when we talk about prevention or the treadmill methods that you were talking about, now this is something that cropped up, and this is probably one of the most popular questions we were asked to raise with you is every single day there is a different miracle hair care treatment on the market. You see them on all the different social media sites, on the adverts. This will transform your hair. There's so much misinformation, and what we were hoping that you might be able to do for us today is kind of separate some of the myths from what actually works. What we don't want is people wasting their money on things that it's almost that snake oil. It's not really going to help, but they look glamorous. The adverts look great. What actually can we do for our hair?
So I would always say that if you are really worried about your hair, you should see a professional at that point. So don't try to self-diagnose, don't get sucked into the algorithm. If you've noticed a significant change, go and see a professional, because we can tell you what is happening and how to treat it. The sort of issue and the complication with this is, so generally, the main evidence-based effective treatment for many types of hair loss, but particularly pattern hair loss, is minoxidil, which is also kind of commonly known of as Regain or Rogaine overseas. But it has to be suitable for you. So again, you really need professional input on that. For all of the hair growth serums or supplements and that sort of thing, they can sometimes be beneficial. It really depends. So a lot of the time when you are looking online at hair growth serums or supplements, you'll see pictures of women who've pulled their hairline back, and there's a sort of recession at the temple here. And that's commonly seen in a condition called telogen effluvium. And this is a stress-related hair loss. So this is caused by a deficiency, a medication, general stress, losing weight really quickly, COVID, for example, right? So often this type of hair loss does recover on its own, actually, once the
Okay.
stress has passed. Once whatever's happened, your body's adjusted, it'll regrow. Whether or not the hair growth serums have sped that up, probably not, but there are some interesting ingredients that might be helping hair strength or hair quality. You'll also see pictures of people with what's called patchy hair loss, or alopecia areata is the term for that. And this is an autoimmune condition. And again, many of those patches do recover on their own. So you just need to be a little bit skeptical. And again, it sort of depends on what's going on. So let's say you've noticed more hair shedding, you've seen a bit of temple recession, you feel like your hair's not quite as good as it used to be, but it's not dramatic. Then trying a hair growth supplement, looking at your general health, getting an affordable hair growth serum, that can all help, right? So there's also a big part of this that's psychological, because hair takes a long time to grow. So when I see a patient in clinic and they're asking me about these things, I'll say, well, this is what we have the evidence for. But if you want to use these things and you're not super concerned, then they're very unlikely to cause any harm, and they might help. But yeah, just be skeptical and don't spend hundreds of pounds on any sort of treatment.
I think that's the thing as well. I think we all, whether it's weight loss, whether it's hair regrowth, eyelash serum, we all want that magic bullet that we see instant overnight results, and that isn't going to happen. It's a lengthy process, and it's going to take its time. Speaking of the sort of the magic bullet, is you've mentioned previously hair weight loss in relation to hair loss. Now, I know a number of people who are on the weight loss injections, and I know a number of them who are having thinning of the hair. So the two linked. So obviously nutrition plays a huge part in our overall health, but how is that linked to the condition of our hair?
Yeah, so essentially, our hair is not important to our body. So if our body feels like it's under threat for whatever reason, it'll basically sort of downregulate. It will pull resources from non-important areas. And in some people, it's their hair, other people, it's their skin, some people, it might be their stomach, right? So when you have rapid, significant weight loss, or I see lots of people on the semaglutide treatments who might not have experienced rapid weight loss, but their nutrition has drastically altered. So they're just not eating very much, or they're really cutting out carbohydrates, for example. Then your body will go, whoa, what is happening here? When I see somebody in clinic, when I'm talking to my patients, I'll say, your body doesn't know that we live in 2024. Your body thinks we are back in the savannah in Africa, right? And as far as your body's concerned, there's a famine going on. So it needs to keep itself alive. So that's essentially what's happening. Now, in most people, it will pass. And once your weight has stabilized and your nutrition is better, then your hair should recover. But if you are getting into, people can be on these medications for years, or their nutrition might be significantly impacted. They might have developed an iron deficiency, for example, then it can take longer.
Okay. And in terms of our general nutrition, is it just a case of a balanced diet, or are there any supplements that we ought to be taking, or is there any particular types of food? We've done another episode around nutrition as we age and the importance of proteins and fats in the diet, because I think everyone growing up in the 90s was scared of fats. Everybody post that was scared of carbs. Now we know no carbs before marbs. But what do we need to keep our hair in great condition as we age?
Yeah, so it's basically general Mediterranean diet, as I'm sure was touched upon in the nutrition episode. Essentially, if you're looking after your body will look after your hair. With the sort of hierarchy of nutrition, and as it relates to hair, enough calories is first and foremost. You need enough calories for hair growth. Then, yes, you need to be eating enough carbohydrates, because your hair is a really high metabolic process. So the cells that divide within the hair bulb, they are some of the most rapidly dividing cells in our body. So that's why when somebody undergoes chemotherapy, your hair can be affected, because it's targeting those fast dividing cells. So you need enough carbohydrates. Then you need enough protein. So yeah, as we get towards menopause and postmenopause, the recommendation typically is trying to hit at least 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's the same for hair as well. And then healthy fats. So our hair does have fat in it. It's almost like the glue that holds the cuticle layer together. So if you're noticing lots of dryness and brittleness, then upping the healthy fats is important. For supplements, again, general multivitamin is fine for most people. If you're worried about your hair, significantly worried, noticed a big change, get a blood test from your GP or see a trichologist or a dermatologist, so we can organize that for you. And then we can check, is there a deficiency, and do you need a supplement? If everything looks fine, then you don't need a supplement for your hair.
That's really, really helpful. I think, do you feel, I know you touched on this slightly before, is I know that a lot of ladies listening today will have been to their GPs with symptoms of perimenopause. They will have been with symptoms of thyroid. I myself have got a very underactive thyroid, and I almost feel, and I know a lot of the ladies feel like this as well, that it's a battle to have things recognised by the GP as a challenge. You said before that sometimes it's seen as cosmetic. Do you have any advice or any tips for anybody out there who is experiencing a significant change in their hair, feels that they would like to visit their GP about that? How do they advocate for themselves with the GP, in order to sort of for it to have the level of gravity that it deserves?
Yeah, so it's really difficult, because you've only got 10 minutes, if that, for your GP appointment. So What I would recommend is really focusing on the emotional impact that it's having on you and the impact it's having on your life and your self-esteem, your confidence. You need to focus on that, because if you go, essentially, unless you are experiencing significant patches or you're kind of totally lost all of your hair. I've had lots of men and women over the years saying, I've been to my GP and they said, "You still got hair?" And I'll say, "Yes, but
Oh,
it's half
okay.
as much as it was before. I'm really worried it's coming out in handfuls," right? So you have to, show pictures if you want. If you feel like you're not getting anywhere, then that's when you see a trichologist, because what we will do is we will write a report, a letter to the GP to say, this is what we've seen. This is what we've seen under trichoscopy, which is our sort of specialist microscope that we use on the scalp. This is what's going on. This is what we think it is. Please, can you do X, Y, Z? So sort of giving quite clear demands, I suppose. Not demands is the wrong word, but requests, polite requests.
I think that's really helpful for people, because actually sometimes you can go, and it can feel as well quite trivial. You'll go into the GP. I haven't got in inverted commas, an illness, but this is something that's affecting my life day to day, and it's trying to get other people to appreciate that is serious, and it does affect you, your particularly your confidence, and your self-esteem. Do you think so? We sort of covered sort of some of the medical aspects of hair care and nutrition and diet. When we're talking around general hair care and shampoos, now I've seen horror stories about don't use anything with sulfur, don't use anything with this, don't use. And I'll be honest, I've tried every different. I find a shampoo that I love and I use it obsessively. Then all of a sudden it stops working. It doesn't work for me. I don't know whether there's a logical reason behind that. Is there anything we ought to be avoiding? Any ingredients in our general hair care that we ought to be avoiding, or is there anything you would advocate for us using to sort of maintain the look of the hair?
In terms of what to avoid, no, there's nothing in particular that you need to avoid. So it obviously depends on your hair type and your scalp type. So I know you mentioned sulfates there. Sulfates are safe and perfectly fine for most people. They are some of the strongest cleansers that we can use. So if you have very oily hair or very thick hair, or you use lots of hair products, then sulfates are great. Or if you've got a scalp condition and it needs a kind of good cleanse, sulfates are fine. If you have, type 4 hair, so curly, coily, kinky afro hair, or it's very dry, or you have a super sensitive kind of scalp or skin type, then you might want to avoid sulfates. The other ones are things like silicones and preservatives that people often kind of scaremonger about. It's nothing to be concerned about. In the EU, we have very strict, I know we're not really in the EU anymore, but we still follow their laws. So we have very strict regulations and testing about cosmetic products. And particularly with shampoos and conditioners, they're already diluted and they're on your kind of hair and scalp for about 30 seconds. So it's really nothing to worry about. What causes the most damage to your hair is things like bleach, other chemical processing, relaxing the hair, keratin treatments, heat, high heat, brushing when it's wet, these kind of basic things. Shampoos can sometimes feel like they're stopping working, and that's because different cleansers might be better at removing different things, and so you might be getting a bit of a build-up on your hair. But yeah, it's sort of general kind of common sense, really. Have a good shampoo and conditioner that's giving you that cosmetic effect that you want. Use whatever styling products make you feel most confident. And again, I suppose if you're really concerned about it, come and see a trichologist, because that's what we're specialists in.
Fantastic. Two more quick questions, and these came from the ladies at the gym. Shout out to all the gym ladies here. Is how often, and this is probably going to be it depends answer, is how often should we be washing our hair? Because there's a great debate raging in my gym about, do you wash your hair daily, once a week, twice a week, or does it very much depend on your lifestyle and your hair type? Is there a recommended amount of times weekly to wash your hair?
So if you have straighter, finer, kind of more Caucasian type hair like me, then 2 to 3 times a week is great. That's usually enough. If you have coily or very curly or super thick hair, then once a week is fine. If you have a scalp condition, you might need to wash every day or every other day to maintain that. It's absolutely fine to wash every day, even if you don't have a scalp condition, if you're using gentle products, and as long as you're not, blow drying and straightening your hair every single time. If you're getting very sweaty in the gym, then I would wash your hair because that can lead to scalp irritation. So yeah, it does depend, but most of the time I feel like people have a good instinct on how often to wash their own hair.
Yeah, there's only so far dry shampoo is ever going to go to
Yeah.
resolve your hair challenges. Um, the one last question, and just to say to all our listeners, we will be putting Kate's details in the show notes, so you can contact Kate at her clinic for appointments. And you also have a wonderful TikTok account that you share a lot of tips and tricks and talk about all the different things that are hair related. So I highly recommend you go along and follow that. Is sleeping with wet hair. Now, I heard somebody say that this is probably one of the worst things that you can do for the condition of your hair. Now, I just want to know whether that's a fact or if that's a myth.
Yeah, it's not ideal. I wouldn't say it's the worst thing you can do to your hair, but it's definitely not, it doesn't help the health of your hair. Your hair is the most vulnerable to breakage when it's wet because it loses its sort of elasticity, essentially. So yeah, it's best to have pretty much dry hair when you go to bed. If it's slightly damp and you put it in a loose plait or a braid, that's fine. But yeah, you want to be careful about going to bed with really wet hair. And I don't think most people do anyway because it's unpleasant.
Very uncomfortable, very
Yeah.
uncomfortable. So I think my takeaway for this is general all-round good health leads to general all-round good hair.
Yeah.
If anyone does have any difficulties and they don't feel able or they're not getting anywhere with their GP, they can contact a trichologist to support and advocate on their behalf. Is there anything that you'd like to say to everybody before we wrap up and say goodbye for today?
I would just say, yeah, if you're worried about your hair and scalp, then please have a look at the Institute of Trichologists website. So there's a directory of all accredited members, so you can find a trichologist that's near you. You're obviously welcome to see me if you'd like. I do online appointments if you're not up near Manchester. But yeah, I generally, I would say most people have a good instinct on how to look after their hair and scalp. If you feel like you've noticed a significant change, then please don't self-diagnose or spend hundreds of pounds on random things. Come and see somebody first.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very, very much for joining us today, Kate.
Thank you.